Okay, I'm going to take a look at those. Okay.
Get to know you guys a little bit better.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, we are live on YouTube.
Thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
It's not quite 3 o'clock, so we'll wait for everybody to get here.
Just Jennifer, who do we, there are a few we know won't make it, right?
Right, Melissa Murphy's going to be late. Diana Queen is joining by audio, but she's on right now.
Councilmember Masadi,
Hello.
she wasn't able to attend.
Right.
Sheriff Witt is joining right now.
Mr. Dunn, Ms. Baird, Sheriff Witt, Judge Scorsoni, Judge Isaac. Judge Isaac's at home too.
I'm at home.
See, Sister Gunther, we've heard from her.
Right. She's in a hearing.
Right.
Folks, I'm going to go ahead and go dark here, but just let me know if you need anything, okay?
Thank you very much. We'll start on time. We're ready.
Let's see. Have we heard from Sister Tana? Is she on here?
Ms. Fogel, no, I don't see her on there. There.
Sister Manifield? Sister Manifield, your mic is hot.
Turned it down. Is it still hot?
Yeah, it's hot.
There's a little background noise somewhere too.
Probably my printer.
Okay, it's 3 o'clock and I'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the subcommittee members and to those who are watching on YouTube. I'm Jennifer Kaufman, one of the vice chairs of this subcommittee on law enforcement, justice, and accountability. The first thing I have to do is read the COVID statement, and here it is. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, state of emergency, and Governor Baker's executive order regarding social distancing, this meeting is being held via teleconference pursuant to Senate Bill 150 as signed by the governor on March 30, 2020, and Attorney General Opinion 2005, and in accordance with KRS 61.826, because it is not feasible to offer a primary physical location for the meeting. The next thing we need to do is to approve the minutes. They have been circulated, and I assume we've all had time to review them. Is there a motion to approve the minutes as written?
Motion approved.
Second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? The minutes are approved as written. First thing I want to say is that we should have mentioned this on Monday. We are here engaged in a quest for racial justice, and we have lost, thank you, as if on cue, we have lost a great warrior in the quest for racial justice. John Lewis, over the weekend, you can see his quote there, "Never ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble." And he was even involved in some of the marches that are part of this outrage over the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis by the police officer. So we convene in his spirit and in tribute to him. I also want to remind us all that we are about systems here and not people. We are looking for systemic racism and systematic racism in the systems in Lexington. You can't come 400 years and go through phrases and periods that have the names of slavery and Jim Crow and lynchings and Ku Klux Klan and burning crosses without having systemic racism, and we're here to help ameliorate that today. I also want to remind us that we're not looking for the perfect, we're looking for the good, and we also have to bear in mind the end result is a report to the mayor. One would hope by the end of August, which is when she wants it. When you submit your recommendations, they don't have to be a dissertation or a thesis. They can be bullet points. They can be simple paragraphs. And I was just talking with Dr. Price yesterday, and she's the one who said, we don't have to do it. We don't have to do a PhD dissertation. We can just do bullet points. We don't have to do every single painstaking analysis. We can recommend that it be done. So let's bear that in mind. Also, by way of introduction, I want to remind those who are viewing that they can email this subcommittee at this address, racialjustice@lexingtonky.gov. Also, we as a subcommittee have a shared folder of public documents and also some working documents that various ones of us have created. The public documents are all available to the public, and the public can have access to those documents by going to the city website, which is lexingtonky.gov. Click on Racial Justice and Equality, and at the bottom of that Racial Justice and Equality page, there is a link to resources and documents, and that's how you find every document we're going to be talking about today. All of that having been said by way of introduction, I want to say that we are continuing our discussion of specific topics, and today, Mr. Cozart, who is the other vice chair of this subcommittee, and I have divided it up, and I'm going to be talking about the broad concept of recruitment, hiring. I should back up and say, I'm not going to be talking about it. I'm going to raise the issue, tee it up, and we're all going to be talking about it. Recruitment, hiring, training, and promotion. And he then is going to be teeing up the discussion on use of force, or what the police department calls response to resistance. So first of all, I should begin this recruitment and hiring and training and promotion discussion by saying this. Before we ever started, Chief Maynard, who's here with us today, sent us all an article out of the Courier Journal, I think, and it talked about the guardian versus warrior mentality. And it mentioned that the recruitment videos, as I recall, for Louisville are more of the warrior type, whereas in Lexington, Lexington Police Department decided a number of years ago, maybe 4 years ago, that it wanted to promote a guardian image as opposed to a warrior image. And so the recruitment video of the Lexington Police Department started looking for people who had been exposed to various areas, such as nurses, people in agriculture, people in sports, and talking to them in their recruitment video about the community and about being part of the community and about being about their family and about the benefits and the education they could get on the police force. So we have to start with that about the police department, that they've pushed in the right direction. They have rebranded themselves, basically, changing from a division to a department and creating their own video after consulting a local branding company, and created their own video emphasizing the guardian aspect here. They have also responded to the 21st Century Task Force on Policing. So, Chief Maynard, don't want you to think we're overlooking the fact that you have, the police department collectively, have begun to push yourselves in that direction toward community policing and that whole mentality. That said, however, we think that there are possibilities that we can do things better to eliminate systemic racism. And so let's talk about recruitment and hiring and training. Who wants to open up that topic? Anybody? Okay, we know that the training, is for, I have 32 weeks. We have the training manual and training overview in our records. The training I have written down is 32 weeks and the probation is 18 months. And I think those are among the longest in the country. Is that right, Chief?
Yes, ma'am. 32 weeks is our training academy, and then the probationary officers, once they graduate from the academy, go on to a 15-week field training phase, where once they get released from that, then they're on their solo phase, and then they have a final end of the year board to be released from their solo phase onto their final selection.
And those are among the longest in the country, as I understand it.
It is definitely in the state. There's five academies. Lexington has been been able to host our own academy for a number of years. Bowling Green just got theirs. Department of Criminal Justice, which does the majority of the state. Louisville Metro and the Kentucky State Police are the 5 academies in the state.
Okay. Anybody else want to talk about what we need to be? Mr. Dunn.
One of the things that I've seen is when you look at the, I guess, selection and the criteria, you'll basically have 5 steps. I guess you'll fill out the application, you'll take a test, and you'll take a physical training course, then you'll be in right for the preparatory class for the oral interview. But where does the screening take place? Because it seems like if you make it through all those steps, what is the criteria that the Lexington Police Department's looking for? Anytime you have a job, you know, it seems like there should be some type of criteria and screening process that eliminates certain people that aren't qualified for the position. So is there a criteria in place to screen individuals who want to sign up or who want to register to be an officer, opposed to just taking everyone that goes through basically filling out the application, taking the test, going through physical training, getting prepped for an interview, and then going through the oral interview? Because if we're trying to weed out those road cops, you know, they've already made it 5 steps without even basically being looked at and being screened, to where it seems like those road cops that may not be suitable to be officers are being prepped for oral interviews to where they shouldn't even made it that far.
You're exactly right, and those steps are taken. We keep track of the folks that have put in prior, and if they were met at a level that there's no way that we're going to hire, then we discuss with HR about removing them from the process. So that is there. The application process is open, and it does go by steps, and at each step it gets evaluated. But you're right, there are opportunities that we can remove candidates from the selection pool at each phase as it goes through.
So is there a criteria that is in place to a criteria and a screening process prior to somebody just after, I guess, they fill out an application?
HR would handle the majority of that. I'd have to ask that question about what that criteria is. Most of them we're equal opportunity, so a lot of folks can apply up front. They take that written exam, which that will cut some individuals from the written exam. Once they go past the written exam onto the physical fitness exam, there will be some folks that will be cut from that because they don't meet the qualifications, and then the oral interview. Once all those phases are done, then at that point is when we really do the background and the polygraph with the pre-polygraph and the screening, and that's where the dive deeper into the background of those individuals, talking to friends and family, looking at their records, looking at the overall what that individual brings for us for selection. And then the final phase, Chief will go through with the background investigators, and they will present those individuals to the chief, say whether the recommendation is to hire or not hire, and the chief has that ultimate say.
Okay, appreciate it, man.
You know, Mr. Dunn brought up the other day the notion that instead of anti-racism training, he'd rather see the police department hire people who we're good at dealing with a variety of people, and we're not racist in the first place. And we kind of tossed that around, and we had one citizen email after the meeting that discussed tests to detect implicit racial bias. And I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that, Chief Maynard, and I know such tests are never perfect, but what would you say about that?
Well, it was a great point. I've actually passed it along to our background section lieutenant. They're reviewing that and looking to see how they can incorporate that in our process. And I will note that we are hiring. We've got a couple more weeks. Our hiring process is open. Like Brandon said, we'd love to have folks that are from Lexington. If we can have folks that are from our community be trained to be police officers in our community, we always are open for those individuals to apply. So our lexingtonky.gov, go to police, and the application process, get all that information is there. If I can throw that little plug in real quick.
There's a plug, and I don't object to you, and Ms. Baird was saying the same thing the other day. They're already having conversations about racism in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, and that's great. Is there any chance that this hiring round right now can include one of those tests to detect implicit bias?
I think if we find one that we can incorporate in our phases, absolutely, depending on where that comes in and those questions. But it's a great opportunity to start that discussion. And as the article stated, it's going on all across the United States right now. So a number of agencies are trying to look at how we can incorporate that. That's
one recommendation I would make to you right now. Go ahead and try to weed that out before these folks ever get on the force. And if you can, as I said, those tests are not perfect, and I know that, but I'm glad you've already passed it on.
We are, and the test itself was the one question that we're looking at, how the test is, but that's already being reviewed with the background. The social media aspect, as we all know, can show a lot about an individual's character, what they're commenting on, the memes that they're sharing, some of those things. And that is already being looked at. And we've removed folks from our process that may be showing some of those racial biases in just their comments or in their memes or posts that they make themselves. So that's being done, but there's more of a prolonged question aspect. I think is what that article talked about with the polygraph, right. Some of those things.
Right.
How much money is put behind recruitment efforts for the Lexington Fair Urban Police Department?
That depends on each fiscal year. I want to estimate 25,000 at one time a couple of years ago. I'd have to look and see how much money has been approved. Budget's been a little tight past couple of years, so we have to be creative on ways that we can find. But I'll look into that for you, Brandon, to find out.
Okay, because there definitely needs, from a lot of things that I've heard and the people that I've spoken with, one of the main things is the policing and individuals, like we discussed, looking for somebody that comes from the community. So if we're not finding those individuals, we got to seek those individuals out in different cities to bring them in Lexington that are basically dealing with the same issues in the urban setting, just like the superintendent for Fayette County. You know, when they hired that superintendent, I was on the board, I was able to help because we understood we needed someone that had the ability and the success of working with inner city people in an urban setting. So if we're not getting officers that are used to working in an urban environment, once you put those officers in an urban environment, there's going to be a culture clash. And once that clash of culture takes place, who knows how far it's going to go. So those are the things when you start looking at the hiring aspects and the screening process that we have to pay careful attention to make sure that we're getting the right officers so that we can put them in the right areas to make sure that the cultural differences aren't clashing. You know, people that aren't understanding the way certain cultures interact with one another and then see it as, okay, this guy looks suspicious. So you say, okay, I hear that a lot. They look suspicious. There's suspicious activity. What does suspicious look like? You know, or somebody running up and down the street on a pogo stick in a clown suit, maybe that may look suspicious, but just because you have a different culture, different swag in the way you walk, doesn't mean that you're suspicious, especially you say high risk, high crime areas, and that start meaning that suspicious activity, a person is suspicious based on the color of their skin alone. So, and of course, we have that gentrification issue, different cultures moving into the community, they're seeing things. So if they make a phone call to law enforcement that somebody looks suspicious, and then you get an officer coming into an inner city environment that isn't from the inner city area, doesn't understand, then now they're beginning a criminal investigation on suspicious activity where there was actually no suspicion at all. It was just people from a different culture that move different, talk different, have now been criminalized based on the color of their skin. So when we're hiring and screening, there has to be something, and we have to come together and get some real good recommendations in place to make sure that, one, we hire people that understand the culture of the community that they're going to be policing and work towards recruitment of officers from the city. And then two, making sure that there are things in place to make sure that we aren't hiring those rogue bad cops that don't like the individuals. And it has to start at that screening process. You know, when you screen an applicant, there has to be something in place to where when you're screening that applicant, you know. So it's almost like if you come in for a job for anything, even at McDonald's, have you ever worked at McDonald's? Have you ever flipped hamburgers? What do you know about McDonald's? What do you know about the register? What do you know about the fryer? So when you start throwing those questions about what do you know about the urban inner city area? What do you know about Lexington? What do you know about different cultures? What do you know about hip hop? What do you know about this? I mean, any terminology that you can throw out there would tell you if that individual is adequate enough to work along somebody within a culture that they understand. And if you don't understand it, you can possibly empathize with it. But at the same time, you empathizing with someone that may be Hispanic or someone that is Puerto Rican and you call them a Mexican. You can be as cool as you want, but that's going to be offensive and offensive enough that it can cause conflict. And you may not have meant anything bad, but we have to really get these recommendations in with this screening process to where we can get the right people for the right job.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope I'm not interrupting, but I also want to ask, he mentioned the term rogue cop. Is part of your screening process designed to reject people who have been police officers elsewhere and have had complaints? And are there any barriers to doing that, such as things that don't show up in personnel files?
Sure. So for Lexington, we're unique that we are in a separate pension system. So we don't have a lot of officers that come from other areas that can transfer in. Say a Versailles officer could transfer to Georgetown PD and still be in the same pension system. So they get credit for those years of service from those two agencies can build up in their pension. Where we're separate, but when you come here, our officers start over in our own pension system. So you don't get that seniority, so to speak, in the pension. You start off fresh. So that does help us. We do have some officers that have transferred in, and we look at that. We look at their files. We look at the open records requests for their any discipline that they've had at their agencies, as well as with Kentucky Law Enforcement Council.
What if they quit under a cloud? I'm sorry for interrupting again, but what if they quit under a cloud? We know that sometimes people have complaints and they leave. We just saw that recently with your former chaplain who retired while issues were still pending. So we know that happens. Do you have access to that sort of information?
Yes. And so the email that I'd sent out about a half hour before this meeting talked about the oversight of one of the articles that was provided. And as part of that oversight, the Kentucky Law Enforcement Council now has regulations over all of law enforcement in Kentucky that if someone leaves under a certain amount of discipline, then that agency is supposed to notify them within a week of that individual leaving of, hey, they left under investigation and what the potential
investigation
of the investigation. And so that documentation gets provided to Kentucky Law Enforcement Council. The Kentucky Law Enforcement Council, what's unique for Kentucky that a lot of states don't have, is they are our governing body for law enforcement, not only for the training aspect for police officers, but also our telecommunicators, as well as our court security folks. So they kind of oversee training for all that. They also can remove that peace officer certification for officers that leave from an agency that may be leaving or retiring for potential termination. So they can pull that, they can review and make their own determination of here's the circumstances around that officer's incident that they may left under, that they can review that themselves and decide, all right, we believe that this officer left and we think we can take the peace officer certification from them and not allow them to go to another agency.
We got an email about something similar to this. And I know we have a lot of emails flying on this committee, but we got one citizen email that said, look at what they're doing in Pennsylvania under reform of police. And so Laura Hatfield, who's tasking us from the mayor's office, staffing us from the mayor's office, looked that article up and sent it out, and you responded after reading it, we already do that. Is that what you're talking about right here?
Yes, ma'am. That's exactly what the Pennsylvania had put in place. There's not for the United States, there's not a federal board that oversees law enforcement. That was one of the recommendations in the 21st century policing. But we have that in Kentucky. We're advanced in Kentucky with our Department of Criminal Justice training that they oversee for all the police departments. And now the Kentucky Law Enforcement Council having the oversight for removing peace officer certifications.
Okay. Any other questions?
It's,
Judge Corsoni.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by how some of these other countries approach police training, and it's much longer, 3 years or so, and the emphasis also appears to be different. The statistics that we've seen about the number of calls and the type of calls, really less than 1% of those calls are about violent incidents. The vast majority of police work is nonviolent work. And yet it appears that we train the officers for that 1%. The tendency then is to approach all cases as if they're part of that 1%. Whereas I think the training in some of these other countries is to really adopt that the Guardian approach rather than the Warrior approach, and really train for that, so that, that's really becomes the focus. And it's not just a racial thing. I mean, it goes even beyond it, everybody, but if you've got some bias, and then you've got also more of the Warrior approach, it just magnifies the problem. Whereas if we start with the training with a different focus, I think that would help us. And I think, let me tell you, I've been to some of these other counties. Our police work in Fayette County is really great compared to some of these other places. And I mean, we should be very thankful that we've got as good of folks that we do have in Lexington. But that doesn't mean, we can't improve. And I would love to see that the training aims for a kind of a different approach from the get-go. And then Judge Isaac circulated that interesting article, which goes to the point that no matter how good the training is, then if the field training officer that takes over, wink and a nod and tells the new recruit, well, that's what they told you at the academy, but this is how it really works. Well, if we aren't careful about that step, in the process, then that could undermine the whole thing. So it's training, but then the supervision. And then, quite frankly, if we are committed to a de-escalation of violence as an approach in policing, okay, then our promotion and our rewards should be commensurate with that. That we should let the people know that if you practice de-escalation of violence in your work, then you're going to be rewarded for that. And one of the emails was to find out how much money we've spent on lawsuits, against police. Why not give officers a financial bonus for documented cases of de-escalation of violence? I mean, I'm serious. Give them $5,000, $10,000 if the body cam shows the officer approached a volatile situation and was able to de-escalate it. The city would be better off by rewarding officers for good conduct, good incidents like that, than having to pay out for, lawsuits against the city.
I think that's a great idea. Our officers do that every day. I'm sure I'll get several messages here in just a minute. I'm ready for my bonus, because it happens. I mean, I can show video after video of officers that go out and take someone that has a knife, threatening them, and able to talk them down. There's a lot more that goes on in our city than folks ever realize, because our folks do a great job trying to de-escalate situations.
And they should be rewarded for that, absolutely. Yeah.
And if they're rewarded and they don't do it, are they going to be fined for not doing it? So if you're going to reward them for doing it, then there's got to be something on the books to where you're fining them for not doing it. So then if you do impose a fine and they can't pay it, then what happens? I mean, so does the city pick up that cost? I mean, so I think when we look at de-escalation, that's one thing, but there's got to be some type of conflict mediation and resolve aspect in it. I spoke with Chief earlier in the week about the certification for CPR, first aid CPR. That is a certification. So when you have a de-escalation training or conflict mediation, I feel as though officers, which was going to be one of my recommendations, just need to do a little more research on it, must be certified in not only de-escalation, but certified in conflict mediation and resolve, because in order to de-escalate, in order to solve a conflict and mediate it, you're going to have to use de-escalation tactics. So if you de-escalate a situation instead of escalate the situation, then are you going to effectively be able to mediate and resolve that conflict before that conflict turns violent? A de-escalation tactic, that is used is good, but sometimes de-escalation doesn't always mean taking somebody to jail. You can take them to jail, let them settle down, but all arrests don't have to end in de-escalation. I haven't seen all the information on the numbers based on when someone acts out in the community. What is that term that is used when disorderly conduct? But disorderly conduct, that shouldn't be something if you're using de-escalation training, because you have to understand that being angry, being upset is a natural emotion. And if you have the ability to de-escalate it, then after you de-escalate it, it has to be some type of mediation and resolve aspect in it. And I would like to see cops not just do maybe an 8-hour course on conflict mediation, but then also be certified. So then if you are certified in conflict mediation, therefore, if you do not take the proper steps to stop a conflict and de-escalate a conflict, and something goes wrong, you can be held accountable for your actions, because you are a professional, but you're a professional that is actually certified in a certain area instead of just taking a course to say you have a certificate of completion.
Along those lines, I don't know whether this came from a subcommittee member or a citizen email, but Chief, do you have any social workers embedded in the police force? Speaking of people who are certified and didn't just take a quick course in it, do you have any social workers embedded in the police? And do you think that would be a good idea?
We have some victim advocates that are on the back end when we take reports that will follow up with victims in some of those aspects. We have the paramedicine group that we work with the fire department that does have some social workers aspect of that, but that's more of a recommendation. Those aren't taking a true calls for service. There's been a lot of discussion throughout the United States about implementing social workers to go take calls for service, whether it's mental health, whether it's narcotics, whether it's truancy, some of those things, in the disorderly conduct aspect of it, there's opportunities, sure, for a social worker to come, because there's more going on than just what that incidence is. There's a quality of life issues that are there. So yeah, there's opportunity to incorporate social workers into the program. My concern would be to have them go out on their own to these type of calls where a lot of times the mental health aspects of it, the disorders, some of the truancy issues do kind of turn into some sort of active aggression towards us or towards the parents of some of the issues with domestic stuff there. So there's an opportunity for that, for social workers to work within some of these cases for sure.
What do you do at 3 a.m. whenever you've had a call that involves mental health, or it turns out to involve mental health, and you're not going to stay there with them? Is there anything open that time of night where you could have people help you out who really are trained to do it?
We are. And majority of our patrol officers are trained. They're certified as crisis intervention.
Beyond that. I mean, truly trained in mental health, not just certified, but honestly educated and trained in mental health, the way Mr. Dunn was discussing.
No, the two hospitals, Good Sam and Eastern State, are the places where we take individuals to. I'll be honest with you, it's very disappointing when we know that there's a mental crisis going on. We don't want to arrest and take them to jail because that's not helping them. We will take them to either one of those facilities, and a lot of times they're turned right back out after they have their initial review that there's nothing that they can do with them, and so they release them. So that is a concern for us as well. We would love to have someone that could come out and deal with that, because it's not a law enforcement issue. They're having a mental health crisis. Our officers can identify that. Our options are to take them to the hospitals to have further review, and then at that point, it's out of our hands. That's where we take them to get evaluated.
Mr. Kozar.
Sister Jennifer, let me ask a quick question here. Great points. Brother Dunn has prompted me a couple of questions for me in reference to this. Will we hear will we hear when we say recruitment and diversification of the force of the department? Will we likely hear, well, we don't have the candidates we solicit, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, but we don't get the applications? Will we hear that?
I think there's a fight for all those candidates right now. That's the problem that we're seeing. We focus on minority recruitment in a lot of places, whether it's going to colleges, whether it's going to sports teams, whether it's going to local businesses, whether it's going to churches. We try to get as much in. I think we're really going to see in the next couple of months that those candidates, minority candidates, aren't going to be available, because not only are the police department, are we fighting for locally, other police departments throughout the state, but local businesses are too. So it's a pool of applicants that we are trying to focus on, but it is difficult.
So and that occurs in other sectors as well, and a similar response comes with the economic development and minority businesses, but we have to nonetheless pursue those. And so, which leads to where I think Brother Dunn very keenly went to the budgetary component. What percentage of the city budget overall goes to the Department of Public Safety? Is it a third, up to
I believe it's around 56 to 60% of the city budget goes to public safety.
So it is.
So the
Public
overwhelming
safety, which would
majority,
include.
which includes
That would
police,
include you.
corrections.
Does that include the jail?
Yes,
That-
police,
that's
corrections,
a big expense.
fire. I mean, it's a large group that it covers.
So to that point, I was just trying to get the departments, and I knew public safety was over 50%. So is there a way that we could see how the city's budget or your department's budget is disaggregated? That would be important. So let's use the word, the elephant in the room and in the nation, and some folk are using defund police. I'm not necessarily a defund police guy, but we know that there is some reforming and some reformation and some probably some jostling that we can do with the budget. And so I would like to be knowledgeable of that, to see how much goes towards recruitment to the point here, how much goes towards training, and those things. That might be helpful. Brother Maynard, is that possible?
It is. Yep. I'll break that down by each of the sections, and you'll see how little of a budget we actually control when it comes to that for those type of fundings. But
yeah, that's good.
Thank you.
Where that jurisdiction lies. You may not know by now, but we may be asking some things of you, my brother.
Yeah, I've been waiting for those, and I just haven't got those yet.
Well, let me just kick it off.
Chief, I want to ask about results in terms of hiring and promotions. When we talked to Chief Weathers, he said one of the very reasons you changed over to a guardian mentality is to attract a more diverse workforce. And so how's the hiring? Is it any better than it was 5 years ago in terms of representation on the workforce? And how about the promotions? Are you promoting more? I want to say women too, but I won't, because here we're talking about racial systems.
They're Black women. So,
I know.
so women count.
I'm just focusing on race, whether they're men or women.
Yes.
Do we have more Black officers, and do we have more Black officers who've been promoted in the past, so let's say 5 years?
I'd have to look at the numbers, but off the top of my head, that we have promoted several minorities and folks that we continue to try to push to take the test, to take the promotional test. That would be excellent supervisors. They decide they want to stay officers. And Brianna and I have discussed this. There's folks that are comfortable when their positions that they are in, whether it's on day shift patrol right now, or whether it's a community services. We have some great officers that are in those other units that would make excellent supervisors. They've got to make that decision. We try to push them, try to ask them. There's several folks that I have gone to personally and said, I need you as a supervisor in our department. Some of them have taken the test and become supervisors, and some have not. That's an issue that is hard to overcome, and something that we continue to try to work on. I'll say this, our command staff right now, Chief Weathers is our only African-American. So that's a knock on us. Our 4 assistant chiefs are all male whites. Our 10 commanders, we've got 1 female white. That is an issue that we have seen over the years and have tried to increase and are pulling folks up to try to help with some of that. But our promotional process, it does take time. We've got some great folks that are sergeants that are coming up, and that will have an excellent opportunity in the future for sure. But we-
Sometimes all it takes is for somebody to say, I see something in you.
Mhm.
I think you would be good. And so what you're saying is that there's individual recruitment going on. But I would have to comment that we asked Chief Weathers the same question, Mr. Cozart and I, when we talked to him before this whole process began. And he said the same thing. We said, is it any better? And he said, not really. And he also said people get comfortable in their position. But I think sometimes people need to be inspired, persuaded, and even flattered sometimes. And it sounds to me as though you're trying to do that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is Tana. On the flip side of that, why do they not want a promotion? Have you taken a poll about that? What is it that is keeping them like, I'm a Black woman, and if there's a promotion to be had, I want it. And so what is it that's keeping them from going up a status? Have you posed that question?
Yeah, we asked that
For
question.
them to be honest and not think that they're going to be reprimanded or something is going to happen. Because I've talked to some Black officers. I'm not going to tell you what they told me on this call, but how is the questioning when you ask minority officers, Black officers, why not take the promotion?
Well, the conversations that I have, and I understand they may tell you something different, and I wish you would tell me that helps us build and have that community input. But a lot of it is they're on a day shift spot. If they get promoted, they're more than likely going to go to a second or a third shift rotation where they got to build back up that seniority. So that's what a lot of it is they're comfortable on the day shift spot. They don't want to go working nights and weekends. They've got family that they're comfortable with their day shift roles. And it takes a lot to transfer, to work that schedule around. Some of them are in specialized units where they have some flexibility on the weekends. Everybody, when you get promoted to sergeant, you're coming to patrol. That's just how it works. Patrol, you're going to work weekends, you're going to have third shifts, you're going to miss holidays, you're going to miss baseball games, you're going to miss family outings. That's unfortunate. That's part of the sacrifice of becoming a supervisor.
We've been talking
Real
about this for a
quickly,
few minutes, and I
Tom's
want to swing over to Mr. Cozart talking about the use of force. But right now, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Dr. Price and Ms. Queen have mentioned wanting to work in some or all of these areas of training, hiring, recruitment, and or promotion. Is anybody else interested in doing your own research on this and working on it and maybe giving us a few tentative recommendations? Anybody besides those two?
I definitely will.
Who's that, Mr. Dunn?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd
Good.
be glad to assist in that area as well. And I do have a couple questions regarding that.
Great. Will you ask them? You want to
Okay.
go talk about it now?
Yeah, I guess, Chief, in terms of the background checks, does the Lexington Police Department look for people that they think can do the job? In other words, hit all the numbers, or are they looking in their background check for things that they think will cause trouble for the police department?
The background check is looking at some of those issues that they may have had in their past, whether it is narcotics use, whether it is social media type statements, whether it's how their behavior and character, what type of integrity and honesty do they have? What do their family and community feel about them? Those are the things that we look at. We're not real concerned about if we think you're going to be a great police officer. Our academy is going to teach you that. Our academy will show that. And we have typically about 10 to 20% of folks that don't make it out of our academy because we have high standards and we want to make sure that you understand what is meant for this community when we do that training. So we're not concerned about whether we think you'd be a great officer. It's more about what your moral and ethics are coming in, that we have an opportunity to have quality folks within our academy.
And the second question is this, in terms of recruiting, and I know that the Lexington Police Department is really, really high in terms of college degree officers. When you're looking at recruits, do you consider the ones with law enforcement degrees over those without law enforcement degrees? And the reason why I'm asking that is because when I was in college, I was not a pre-law major. I concentrated on communications. And walking down the hallway, there was a poster that said, that asked all the communications students if they would be interested in or consider a degree in, a career in law. And when I was looking to change careers, that always stuck in the back of my mind. So when you're looking at candidates, do you consider only those who are, I guess, have backgrounds in law enforcement, or being better candidates than those not in law enforcement?
Not at all. The college degree shows us that you're able, that you have worked on some education. All we require is a high school degree. We're going to give you an associate's degree just going through the academy as part of our partnership with BCTC. We would look at, like you said, a communication major. What can they do? They can use this right here a lot better than some other folks. So that's great. We would love to have a wide variety. The law enforcement background's good. I've got a law enforcement degree. I'm not going to say that everything I learned with that degree has helped me here, but it's given me some insight. I think just about anything across the board, we've had doctorates, we have master's degree, we've got lawyers, we've got folks with high school education, and they all work together great. That diversity helps us.
Okay, thank you. Great discussion, robust discussion. And then those four folks, Ms. Queen, Dr. Price, Mr. Harris, and Mr. Dunn, go forth, do your own research. You may email or call each other individually. You may not work as a team. You may not work as a group. If you do, you have to do a Zoom meeting, and it has to be public because of the open meetings law. But please do your work, and sometime next week, definitely within the next 10 days, we'd like to see some tentative recommendations from you individually. We'll work out the overlap, but let's swing over and talk about use of force. Mr. Cozart, can we do that?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to, bit of an intermission before we go into the use of force, or a little more housekeeping. One, as individuals are designating themselves and volunteering to work on certain subject matter areas, please know that, and we just want everyone to know this, and we communicated with the committee, we don't have additional groups from this subcommittee. These individuals are working autonomously or individually in their respective areas of interest, expertise, and then they're being synthesized together. So there are really no other large group gatherings or meetings outside of this. And so you will not be missing anything as the public. Additionally, those notes will be put on the same drive, the city government shared drive, as mentioned earlier. One more thing about that drive that we did not mention, everything will be there except for, and we want to be forthright, except for our forming and evolving recommendations, as well as any public or citizen emails and comments, because we are going to respect and regard those two things as embargo. And those recommendations, the only reason they won't there is because they're evolving. We will get additional information and those will evolve. And so just wanted to be very clear and transparent about that. But just the creation of that drive and the information that we're getting from currently, primarily the LPD, and in the future will be other institutions. we feel like that transparency is part of getting at the spirit of the work that we're doing. So we're already seeking to create that transparency of our work and community. And so please know that. The other piece of housekeeping that I wanted to do is let sure as a committee that we keep the integrity of our committee. We had a couple of interlopers last week, a couple of folks who just jumped on the call. That may have just been a mistake, or and so we're not trying to be a closed process at all, evident by all the things that have been mentioned and all the accessibility that is there. But this time it's going to be used as for this work group and respecting your time and commitment, so it won't be opened up. So let's just make sure as committee members that we don't share the Zoom link. I don't know if anybody did, but let's not do that because that could convolute this time. So I just wanted to say that in the way of housekeeping. Also, lastly, and I will get into the response to resistance. There has been work going on, much good work going on. If email traffic is any indicator of good work, we're knocking a home run because there's a lot of email traffic. We realize that. And it's not the sole indicator, but wanted folks to know that if you were tuning back in with us and wondered, what did they do? What happened with body worn camera conversation, and what happened to the Citizens Review Panel conversation? And that's where I last left off in this committee. Please know that that work continues. We just, for the sake of the work group, are moving towards and building, but there is work still going on by individuals on a Citizens Review Panel. And in fact, a request that we're going to have, Laura, perhaps to whomever needs to do that, either attorney, George, or whomever, a request that has arisen is, if we said yes to Citizens Review Panel, what would be that flow chart? We know there's KRS and all the other things. We don't have to get in those weeds again. That's very clear. But if we said yes, just so we clearly have that outline for ourselves in citizenship that are asked a question, give us the outline of the steps that would need to happen for that. And so the public to know, and this, for one, wanted to appreciate this group for the work that's going on, and just echo what Jennifer said earlier about also wanting the public to know that there is work still going on that Saturday that we previously mentioned. Any questions or comments about any of that among the committee? All right. Just as Jennifer said, I'm only going to facilitate this portion of time and prime this pump and get are more astute and may have a particular interest in this subject area. Response to resistance. First, response to resistance and use of force being synonymous is an interesting, very interesting dynamic to me. I am all about asset-based language, and that may be where that comes from, but response to resistance seems to put the emphasis on and onus on the citizen as opposed to the one that's there to protect and to serve. And that's an initial observation. Now, I will say this harkens back to our previous conversation when we started talking about giving bonuses when aggression and was not used, or when responses were done, were de-escalated, is what we were talking about. My children get tired of me using them as illustrations and analogies, but I don't give my son stuff for doing what he's supposed to do. You just don't get cookies for that in my house. You don't get cookies for washing your tail. You're supposed to do that, bro. And so you don't get cookies for doing, that's a very crude analogy. I'm sorry, I forgot I was public. But you just don't get incentivized for doing the things you're supposed to do. And I wonder what phenomena we're creating or what culture we're creating if in fact we have to incentivize people to do things and not harm people and to do things that are perceived to be right and best practice. In case we were to get to that conversation in reference to response to resistance or use of force. And so what we know is that Chief has been very gracious in getting us all the things that we've asked for. And again, thank you for that, brother. We've been calling on a lot information from you. The anecdote would be, and if we talk to many folks out there in Zoom land and that are watching this, we would say that the institutional racism and that we're working against has created a condition by which Black, Indigenous people of color have force used on them more. We can cite times when someone has force used on them that are Black, when as someone, their white counterpart, goes peacefully in. You know, I stopped just short of pulling up a video of a brother that was actually chasing the police, and it was clearly being filmed by somebody that was African American. And at the end of the video, they said, "Oh man, this guy's gonna get shot." And one of them said, "It's lucky he's not Black." He's like, "Oh, if he was Black, he'd been shot." That sounds very anecdotal and loose, but I'm gonna share my screen if I can here and pull up some of the information on the drive that we have from our Google Docs that folks, everybody has access to. And you guys should be seeing that information again, that information. Somebody give me a thumbs up if you see it.
We've got it, yeah.
Good. And this is the information Chief Maynard has given us. And so we want to move from just anecdote and qualitative to sort of quantitative. So here's firearms pointed, because I encourage everybody to look at this when they get a chance. Is firearms pulled is considered a use of force, right, Chief?
The firearm, when it is pointed at a suspect, the officer can have their firearm out down at the ready position, which for us is down at the ground or out of the holster. It does not necessarily have to be reported. This is when it's physically pointed at an individual that we document that.
Yeah, yeah. And so here are the numbers, and and I'll open up for conversation after this and encourage others to go back. I don't know how well you can see the screen, but 2017, 2018, 2019, again, thank you for getting the data. Here are suspects by race and then officers by race. So those would have been who pulled the guns. Again, let's about this number. I would say, Chief, the total firearms pointed at a suspect in Louisville. I'm not talking about our sister city or anywhere, but in cities perhaps comparable to us, those may be higher. You know, so we probably don't do God awful, right? But let's look at the disproportionality of the condition. So unequivocally, every year, a firearm, African Americans than Caucasian. I don't want the firearm pointed at them anymore. I don't think anybody does. But we need to know of that, right?
Can I ask a question? This may have been what you just said. Do we know what the what was happening? Like, do we know this was in the course of, or they were just resisting? Do we know what was happening behind that?
I believe that was provided as the overall response data that you could go in and look per each year. That's on the response to resistance yearly summary. That should be linked to there, that it'll show you what they were doing. And if I could go ahead and say this while you're pulling that up, there's also every one of these reports gets reviewed by a supervisor. So it's not like we just document and say, yep, that happened. There is every single report that gets put in the system is vetted through a supervisor, it's vetted through their lieutenant, it's vetted through their commander, then it goes to the assistant chief. So we look at these, and yes, the numbers are higher for African Americans, but if there's an issue that we have with, hey, you shouldn't have pointed your firearm, then we address that. And likewise, I say on every one of these that if they were good, then we document and say, yes, we feel comfortable with the full use of force that was provided here based on the situation that the officer was put in. And again, if it's not, then we address that.
Yeah, and that's part of probably the disciplinary procedures on this specificity of response to resistance or use of force. The disproportionality in those rote numbers tell a story in and of themselves. And so we know these are, well, let's look at non-lethal just real quick. It's another smaller document. So this is TASER deployments. Again, the numbers, they went down in well, that's only through half the year. So if we were looking at extrapolating, it's probably going to be similar to 2019, perhaps.
Mr. Cozart, if I could make one point, the response to resistance yearly summary does not capture if you'll see the tabs at the bottom, the 2017 TASER data, that if you click on that one, it will show what the response, what the citizen or the suspect response was to the officer while they drew the TASER. That should be noted on there. And same thing with the fire.
Okay, I don't have a hot document up there when I'm sharing it, so I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. Go to the tabs. Please know that we could do that. So Sister Baird, maybe that's something you can help us out with disaggregating that information and helping us out. But here we see the same phenomena with the TASER. Clearly, each year, here in 18, it's well, in 17 and 18, it's double proper. And about almost synonymous this year, so maybe we'll make it some. And then we can look at, and that's clearly going to be a higher number because of the demographics of the force. It's going to be predominantly white men. But here again, the same narrative being told.
Could I ask for a pause right there, Mr. Cozart? And Chief, I noted, and Mr. Cozart noted it too, that back in 2017, it was disproportionately large. It was maybe double. And then it got a little closer so that this year so far it's 16 and 14, as I recall. And so I know you have, as part of your training, implicit bias training, you have people coming in and talking to you about racism as an issue, systemic racism. I hope the numbers are going to show some better proportions, but you know, we ask you for a feel about whether you have more promotions and why not. Do you have a feel about whether some of this use of force is getting better in terms of race, in terms of demographics? Do you talk about it? Do you discuss it?
We do, and I'll say this, we were a lot younger a couple of years ago. And so you have younger officers that may pull out their TASER and use it instead of going hands-on until they learn how to de-escalate some of that. So I think that's a factor. The other factor is we may have had more people that were fighting us on calls back then than we have now. It's a lot of stuff that goes into those each individual calls that can stipulate why they decided to use the TASER.
You know, a football team looks at video more than once a week. I mean, some of these football players go into the video room every day. Do you go back and look at your videos from body cams, and does somebody acquainted with implicit bias talk to you about that and compare these situations and elicit conversations about bias in a particular situation?
That's a good point. That's going to be one of my recommendations for the article that I think Dr. Price sent that talked about body worn cameras in the implicit.
Now that's going to be one of my recommendations too.
Don't steal it from me. We'll join that together. How about
Yeah,
that?
we can do it. But you know, you're a team. You have coaches. You have people come in and teach you as experts in the area of implicit bias, just like these football coaches over here. You know, the offensive line coach comes in and talks about good technique. Well, you can have people come in and talk to you about good technique too. It may be expensive, but they can come in and do that.
Absolutely. So we talked about this with the documentation report. So every supervisor is going to review that video. And that's an opportunity that I identified that for our supervisors and even our field training officers to have some more training on the implicit bias so they can look at that. Because currently we don't have someone that watches that video specifically for implicit bias.
Well, that's great. And I'll let you make the recommendation. Then I'll just edit it to death. How about that?
I'm sure Dr. Price will jump to that as well. But no, those videos do get reviewed. Like I said, they go all the way up the chain. I approve every blue team report that comes through the Bureau Patrol, and every other assistant chief does too that comes through their bureau. So those videos get reviewed. But that's a good training point that article brought up that we could have specifically looking through that implicit bias angle for sure.
Now I have something to add real quick, if that's okay. Am I
Please.
live?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got you. We got you.
I'm a card holder for carrying concealed deadly weapon. I'm not gonna pull my gun unless I'm gonna shoot and kill you. If I pull my gun, I don't shoot and kill you, I'm gonna go to jail for brandishing a firearm or terroristic threat. Then once again, that goes towards a point to where carrying a firearm is a lot of power in your hand. So with that power comes great responsibility, and resolve and conflict mediation comes to play. You know, coming from where I come from, I'd say it's like a war zone growing up, you know, and to make it out and be 40 years old, you know, I feel like that's a success within itself. But what I'm saying that to say is that's why it's so important for that conflict mediation and resolve piece to come in, because you can't always, even though if you're a guardian, you do not have to pull your pistol. In some situations, it is pulling a pistol to try to intimidate somebody or bend somebody to your will. Either they're gonna bend or they're not. So there's no different than pulling a firearm out and pointing it at them, or going upside their head with a nightstick or a pistol whipping them, because the same mental issues are going to result from having a gun pointed at you. You know, you're going to be looking at a host of mental issues of having a gun pointed at you. You know, it's going to create problems. People might want to self-medicate, want to start doing drugs, or they might turn even violent towards somebody else. So that first conversation piece is so important, not just about de-escalation, but conflict mediation. Then it goes back into hiring practices to where you're in a community, you have that ability to speak and deal with a person that is angry. And let's be honest, you pull a pistol out, a lot of times I'm gonna tell you pull your pistol out because you're scared. You're not gonna pull your pistol out on somebody if you feel like you can take them. You're pulling that pistol out because you're scared of an individual, and that individual is more than likely a threat, and you feel that that threat can hurt, harm, or kill you. So therefore you're prepared already to hurt, harm, or kill that individual, even if you don't need to. So if you're pulling your pistol and you're not shooting, not saying that I want 16 people shot dead in Lexington. That's not what I want. I don't want those high numbers of saying you pull your pistol so you have to shoot. What I am saying is officers have to have the ability to navigate around certain situations to where they do not have to pull those pistols, and you have to have those officers in those positions that have that ability to do so. And this is coming from people that are working in the community, that are certified and work in conflict mediation and resolve, that are always mediating situations between young individuals that pull those pistols. So once a young person respects you on a certain level and understands that it may not be your job to be their friend, or it may not be your job to mediate the situation. You know, we have to look at that scope. But there's a very important piece that needs to be implemented in that police department to make sure that the individuals that are in those areas can actually handle those situations without resulting to pulling a pistol, because that is how you get into the situations to where you're shooting what they say is a unarmed person because you were fearful you didn't handle the situation correctly.
If I could jump in, and I understand where you're coming from, Brandon, for sure. But, you know, over almost 11,000 arrests, and we only pulled our firearms and pointed at 49 people. I feel that we do a pretty decent job with that, and that the officers, there's always room for improvement, but the officers pull it when there is a reason. And we're not pulling to intimidate. We're pulling it because there's an issue that they are going to address. You have to meet evil with evil sometimes, and that's what we have to be prepared to do. It's not all the time. The guardians that we try to be, that's it. But let me give you an example. The most recent one, that an officer pulled a firearm and pointed at a young man. He was involved with a robbery. Officer gets out with him. He takes off running, and he pulls his gun out of his pants while he's taking off running because his pants are falling down because he's got his gun in it. The officer pulls his gun out, has continued yelling, drop the gun, show me your hands, drop the gun, don't turn around, stop running, drop the gun. That officer draws his firearm on that individual as he stops and he's turning around. That officer could have been justified. That officer, because of his training, was able to calmly lay down on the ground, put your hands out, don't drop that firearm. And thank goodness the individual that he was placing under arrest for a robbery that had just occurred got rid of that firearm and did not turn around and address the officer. That's one instance that's documented on that report. That's justified. I'm fortunate we are very fortunate we don't have a lot of those instances, but the training that officer had was phenomenal. They responded phenomenal to it. And I think that's what we would all expect to do. But I take your point for sure. And there's definitely opportunities for that de-escalation that can be part of that.
Because, you know, that one point is, it only takes one. If there's 20 shootings of unarmed Black men in America, all it takes is one. The folks out there in the community, they don't care what's going on. All it takes is that one time. So if you have 1,400 arrests and one man shot, the stigma is all cops are bad, let's burn the city down. So we're trying to move towards how do we eliminate it. And of course, zero tolerance is not something that we can do about pulling a gun, because certain situations call to where you have to. But the situation and the temperature that we're dealing with right now today, all it takes is one time, one cop. We haven't had a shooting of a unarmed, quote unquote, Black man in Kentucky, or Lexington rather, for almost over 20 years. But if we had one today, everything else is off the table and the city's gonna burn. So we have to make sure that we understand that.
And I understand that. I just wanted to say something. I know we're in the time where we have COVID-19 happening, and I know that officers are not having joint roll calls or roll calls. They just check in when it's time for their shift. And I was wondering if there's possibly any way for the people that are doing the recruitment, hiring, and training to maybe do some sort of ride along where they're able to experience patrol firsthand, so they can actually see it in real time, so that there's a better understanding of the urgency to act in certain ways and in certain manners that police have to when they're presented with certain situations, as opposed to assuming that we know or assuming that we know of remedies to how police should police, without really truly understanding in real time how split decisions have to be made to make sure that they're ensuring the safety of the citizens of Lexington and also their own lives. So I was just wondering, Chief, do you think there's any way that if anyone wants to, could possibly do a ride along during this pandemic that we're having?
I wish there was. We have shut down ride-alongs due to COVID at this point. We've shut them down since March, I believe it was. So that is a great recruiting tool that we utilize to bring folks in, to get in the car with an officer and let's go see what we got. We'll have nights where folks will complain, hey, we didn't really get into much. We took 35 reports. Hey, that's policing. That's what that part is. And then we have other nights that meets what everybody thinks is going to be on cops, and it's exciting, and you run lights and sirens and do a bunch of stuff. But yes, that is a great opportunity, and I hope that we can open that back up soon.
I see
Is there
Sister
someone
Minifield here, and I'm sorry, who did I interrupt?
I'm sorry.
I saw Sister Minifield's hand up, Brother Harris.
I just
and
had a
then
real
Sister
brief,
Isaac.
just a real brief, could you Chief, could you do some kind of virtual ride along that would be on YouTube or something that could be on social media or, might get very popular? I
Do a
don't know.
concept
Ride
episode.
with so-and-so.
That's right. That's a good idea. I'll run that by our public information office. I know
There
they're
you
working on
go.
some other
Make a new
videos,
star.
for sure. Yeah.
Get some recruiting in there. It's good.
Absolutely.
And I just had two comments about what's been said. One, I know we're talking about pulling guns, and I know Judge Crisoni has done a lot of research on other countries and how, there's several other countries that officers don't even carry guns. They just don't carry firearms. And those countries, seem to have a whole lot less of a fatalities and things of that nature. So I don't know if anybody's going to look at that as something, as a possibility or have any numbers on that. And two, when they talked about social workers and things like that, the Cabinet for Health and Family Services Child Protection Division is always called for law enforcement assist. If an officer is involved with a juvenile or there's children involved when there's drugs or guns or crime going on, they call for a social worker to come, someone that is more apt, trained, and capable of handling the children that are involved in that environment and situation. So they do utilize social workers that are trained and appropriate to come for law enforcement assist. So it's not that the officers may not have a social work degree, but they call help from people who do have social workers degree when kids are involved.
Good point. That's correct.
Thank you, Sister Minifield. Brother Harris.
I have my concern is I know we talk a lot about people getting shot by the police, but I think a lot of abuse by police happens not with getting shot, but by getting hit with nightsticks, fists, and with tasers. What class of weapon does the Lexington Police Department consider the nightstick and the taser, and what's the standard for deploying those two instruments?
So our baton or nightstick is an intermediate weapon, as well as the taser. Both those are intermediate weapons. In our response resistance policy on page 9, if you want to reference that, it covers what all of our levels of control, so to speak, are, from officer presence all the way down to deadly physical force, and it outlines all that. For the most part, what our recommendation or what our training is that you don't use only the force that is objectively reasonable. So if you're having someone and you're going to place them under arrest and they turn around and you're able to put handcuffs on them without a fight, then that clearly does not justify jumping up to that intermediate weapon. If you're fighting, depending on the size of the individual, depending on the size of the officer, depending on how long you've been struggling, you can go through that list and jump from, hey, officer presence of just showing up to utilizing that intermediate weapon. So that there's a number of levels that helps illustrate that, or opportunities that's discussed in our policy.
So I just wanted to ask a question. I heard him say the size of the officer, and I also want to throw in the handcuffing of the assailant and the abuse of how many officers show up for a particular complaint. All of those are abuses as I see it. If you have like 10 officers that show up because a man is his disorderly conduct includes abuse of alcohol or drugs. And then I don't know, maybe a female officer or he said the size of an officer is maybe I heard that wrong, but that's what I heard, and I could be wrong. And I don't know if protocol says you wait for another, depending on the situation, that there should be 2 officers that take somebody down, or the slamming of the person into the concrete. And then do you use the zip tie or do you use the metal handcuffs? So those are some of the things I would like to see as we talk about procedures and processes. And so that's what's on my mind. I'm just really kind of listening today. I've got so many people who have called me concerning the viewing of our live stream. And so I just like to throw that in.
Well, Tanya, to address some of your questions, each incident is going to present its own circumstances of what's appropriate for response. Overall, we typically use the metal handcuffs, not the zip ties. Traditionally, the metal handcuffs are what is used on the officer's body or utilized for the wagon transport. As far as number of officers that show up, it depends on what the call is. If it's a disorderly subject, typically 2 officers will get dispatched to handle that. 10 would be excessive in a normal call, and we would look at that. And happy to answer any of those questions. When they said, well, why did 10 officers show up on a call? That's exactly right. We would want to ask those questions as well. But there may be a situation where we.
I don't mean to interrupt you. Chief, I don't mean to interrupt you. Can you pull the file from last night? There was a gentleman who was drunk on Bryan Avenue. They already had him in handcuffs sitting down, but 4 police cars was there for a drunken man who was sitting on the curb already. What we have seen, I don't know about anybody else on this call. There will be a call. The wagon will show up. They will place the person in the wagon, and then 6 to 8 officers will still stand around and have a conversation for the next 30 minutes.
I mean, what time was that call, or what time was that incident?
Last night, it was, okay, we went to Mass, that's at 5:30. It would be about 7 o'clock. We were coming from Kroger. So, and we just noticed, I started to just take pictures and film. But yeah, on Bryan Avenue, and it was either Carlisle or one of those adjacent streets. So
Okay,
the gentleman was
inside New Circle, not by the Kroger.
inside New Circle, yes, by Castlewood.
Okay, well, we'll take a look at that.
In terms of a systems change, the question is, we've got a drunkard on the street. You know, should we call a police officer and all the equipment and all the weaponry and all that stuff, or should we call some drug and alcohol specialist to approach that person and try to come up with something? Same thing with mental health issues. We're asking the police officers to show up with all their guns and all their equipment. Why don't we divert these people and these cases and get other professionals to come to the scene? If they need the help of the police because the situation is dangerous, then they call the police. But the whole point is to use the police for those cases where we need them and try to get these other folks handled by other professions.
That's those models are there. So I'm going to kick it to you to land the plane completely, Judge Kaufman. But I'm going to wrap this piece. So
can I ask a quick question? Are you going to end that? Are you going to wrap this up? Can I ask a question before you wrap up?
Yeah, I'm gonna ask for folk to work on this piece too, as well as you ask your question.
Oh, okay. I just didn't want you to close out before I asked a clarifying question real fast. Thank you. So this is to Chief, and my question, when we're talking about use of force, and I know that you all, if somebody pulls a gun or there's a allegation that they punched a guy in the wagon while he was handcuffed or something along those lines, and you all review that, I guess, for violation of policy. Is there anybody that reviews that for potentially an officer crime? So for example, if they punched a person and injured them, where it would maybe an assault fourth and assault second if they weren't justified. Does anybody investigate that for a potential crime from that an officer may have committed, or do you all just look at it for policy violations?
We believe that there was a potential crime that was committed, then we would pass it off to KSP to investigate that.
Okay, so then in a situation where, and I'm just trying to think of one that sometimes happens. So for example, if a person is cuffed and the officer punched him in the face, that you all decided was a violation of policy because the person was handcuffed, no longer posed a threat or something along those lines, where criminally it could be an assault fourth. Do you all then call KSP to investigate that, or what? Or no?
No, because during the course of it could be misconduct. And if we feel that it'd be a criminal charge for official misconduct, then we would pass it off. So that would depend on the situation.
Okay.
I have a question too, Mr. Cozart, but I'm not sure if we have time.
Is that you, Sister Queen?
It is, yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I see you lit up down there now. Yeah, go ahead. I think I saw you trying to jump in earlier when I don't see the visual. It made it hard. So please.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask, Chief Mayor, when we think about all these situations that involve, that are about use of force, and many times they're very concentrated in a matter of a small area that may be in regard to frequency. And my question is, you have a series of officers who work those particular sectors or areas or streets or beat, in that area. And I want to know, first of all, how often those police officers are rotated around, what determines what officers work in a particular area, and how do you, sort of culturally help the entire department to understand that what happens in one area is very distinctively different than what happens in another, and how that overall, really equates to what the public believes about the Lexington Police Department in the sense of perceptions and other things. How is that done?
That's a great question, and I'm not sure Brother Cozart is going to give me full 7 minutes here to answer. But there's a lot that goes into that.
No, I'm not.
There's a lot that goes into that.
That question for a while.
Yeah. And I'll say that, and we'll probably have to follow up at the next discussion next Monday.
Okay.
But I'll start with, we rotate every one of our field training officers, try to rotate them through each sector, because each sector is different. And what the neighborhoods that they compose of, as well as some of the calls for service. So we start with that, but the officers can rotate out every 6 months. They can bid on the shift and the sector that they want to work in. Goes by seniority. Now we do have officers that know their area. They stay in the same beat. That's part of the community policing effort that we like to have, because they, one, know who the businesses are, know who the neighbors are, know who the folks that are coming in, and even the ones that are causing trouble. They get to know them, as well as those folks get to know the officers. Our neighborhood resource officers are built on that concept, to have the same officer go into neighborhoods every day. They get to know everybody. But there are times when we will say that the officer, for the benefit of the community and benefit of them, you've been working this area too long. We think we need to rotate you out to another sector to get a different perspective. And so we have the right to do that, and we have done that. That's about as brief as
that's actually. Thank you. Thank you for that brevity. We do need to give it more attention. We know that. So to that point, to that end, I need to identify individuals that want to give this more attention. I do want to highlight one thing. So we could talk about anecdotes. I could talk about my son that got pulled over for speeding that felt like, was intimidated because the officer immediately had his hand on his pistol. Those things, all those things occur. We heard that anecdote last week. As well. You said something real interesting, Chief. You said sometimes you have to return evil with evil. I don't disagree with that as a fellow that used to be in different competitions and has a fairly competitive side and believe it or not, have a pretty high strong side at times. I believe that it gets down to that. The question is what was alluded to earlier, what is evil? And what is evil if I come from the neighborhood that Brandon referenced? And what is evil if I come from Whitesburg, Kentucky? Or what's evil if I come from Boulder, Colorado? What is evil if I come from the Bronx? And what if I am the guy, everybody's got an interpretation of evil. And what if we, as officers, actually fall into someone's category because of historical disproportionality that our numbers actually describe today? What if that is considered evil? That's an interesting perspective. I don't consider you evil, but systemic racism, I absolutely do. Let us not forget that we have in the drive the numbers. We went straight to guns, but tasers, also pursuits that lead to prolonged interaction, are all disproportionately tilted towards African Americans in a community where they are much lower population. They're much higher represented. To Sister Queen's point, if we go to the geography of where these things are occurring, it's going to be a disproportionality too. So systemically, as Judge Corsoni so keenly pointed us back to, systemically, what can we recommend and what will be the barometers or what will be the metrics by which we are determining whether our training and our discipline and our changes that we're recommending are being monitored and it's actually changing. We should look at these numbers of pursuits, tasers, and weapons pulled on African Americans and others. Hopefully they all go down, but the disproportionality should be decreased. I believe that's one such way we can measure it. Because like you said, evil for evil, can we humanize everybody? And can there be equity and equality in how we're perceiving and seeing people? And so I think that I would like to ask who is willing to work on this element of this. I know who's been vocal. I don't want to assume that means you want to go on and work on the recommendations.
Yeah, I'm always down. And I'm definitely one that
Okay,
will
good.
work towards them.
Who else?
So am I, Diana Queen. Yep.
Oh, great. Who else? Judge Corsoni, you had a little recommendation in there. You interested?
You're muted, brother. You're muted.
My interest is the legal scheme of how we handle the discipline matter, which I think is it's a real important issue the community wants us to address. And that I would feel more inclined to look at the legal framework for that, if I could.
Okay. Who else? Anybody else? Okay, we're good. We're good. All right.
This on the recommendation.
This is just who wants to do research and make some suggestions or recommendations. You know, and as I said, you can call each other or email each other. You just can't meet as a group or a team. Would
Okay,
you be
I'd like-
interested, Ms. Vogel?
Yes, please.
Good. Okay, because you have some valuable observations. Thank you. Okay. Mr. Cozart indicated, I need to, as he said, land this plane. The rest of our agenda for today had to do with looking ahead to more of a focus on the justice system and with additional information we need. We've already started gathering documents and information. Tomorrow morning, Mr. Cozart and I at 8:30 in the morning are meeting with the state DPA. We're trying to get statistics out of the Department of Public Advocacy. We've already met with local public defenders. And so if you think of other information we need to be gathering, please let us know. Secondly, if you want any guest appearances to this committee, let us know and we'll try to set that up. And thirdly, I want to say, just looking ahead, please be aware that the commission and the city are doing a series of virtual town halls on these various subcommittees. Our subcommittee is teaming up with another one, and we are going to be on August 4th. My memory said at night, but is that right, David? 6:30? Yeah, it's at
Yes.
night. We'll send you an email as soon as we have specific information. That series of
Laura may have that right now if you want. Laura, do you have that?
I don't have it. It's not been produced yet, but I know that it's from 6:30 to 8.
we can get the schedule out, and it's 6:30 to 8 on August the 4th. If Mr. Cozart and I will be on there, unless we think one of you would be better, and that may be possible. If you are either interested in being on there or nominating someone from our subcommittee to be on there, Renee Shaw is going to moderate all of these town halls, and they will begin next Tuesday, July 28th, and ours, the one that focuses on us, will be August 4th. I encourage every subcommittee member to put this date on your calendar, August 4th, 6:30 to 8. And we probably better wrap this up. Today's Thursday. We will meet again. Keep your tentative recommendations coming in. Brianna Persley started this. Thank you, Ms. Persley, with the first recommendations, tentative, and everybody's tweaking it. Keep those coming in. Keep your work flowing. And again, thank you, Chief, for giving us so much information. And if there's nothing further, we will see all of you on Monday at 4 o'clock, 4 to 5:30. Thank you so much for all of your good work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.